Shock.
After shock.
After shock.
After shock.
Warning.
After shock.
The sexual transformation of a man into a woman will actually take place before your very eyes in Dr. Jekyll.
And Sister Hyde.
A man by day.
A woman by night.
The perfect disguise to indulge your lust for sex and violence. Dr. Jekyll.
And Sister Hyde.
An American International Pictures release in color, rated PG.
Was he a woman?
Was she a man? Or were they both?
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that's...
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
You're listening to the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And on this episode, we will be exploring the groundbreaking, gender-bending Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971.
Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde was directed by Roy Ward Baker, written by Brian Clemens, based on The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, and produced by Brian Clemens and Albert Fennell for Hammer Film Productions.
I think it's safe to say that's loosely based on The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
There are quite a few similarities.
Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde stars Ralph Bates as Dr. Henry Jekyll, Martine Beswick as Sister Hyde, Gerald Sim as Professor Robertson, Louis Fiander as Howard Spencer, Susan Brodrick as Susan Spencer, Dorothy Alison as Mrs. Spencer, Ivor as William Burke, Tony Calvin as William Hare.
It also stars Philip Madoc as Byker, Paul Whitsun-Jones as Sergeant Danvers, Virginia Wetherell as Betsy, the French-speaking prostitute, Irene Bradshaw as Yvonne, Geoffrey Kenion as First Policeman, Anna Brett as Julie, Jackie Poole as Margie, and Rosemary Lord as Marie.
Our film opens with a single lit candle against a red curtain as the credits play out.
And a lovely tune plays, one that will recur throughout the movie.
When the movie proper begins, the first shot is of a dead rabbit, and we find we're in a butcher shop. A woman who's just standing around starts singing a song, He'll Be There, which she sings throughout the whole film.
2 songs in this movie, and you'll hear them over and over.
And we see a man in a black cloak walking the crowded streets, and he peers into the tavern.
A woman, who we can safely assume is a streetwalker, leaves the pub. She's watched by that shadowy figure who follows her. In front of a sign asking for information on the Whitechapel murders, she sees the man following her. He raises his long knife, brings it down, and the blood splashes onto the poster. He carves her up the way the butcher is carving up that rabbit.
They cut back and forth to be sure we can see the connection.
And he removes something from her body and places it in a box. I don't know that we ever know what it is, but we know the gist of it later. And then he goes off.
Before long, a wandering Bobby finds the body and blows his whistle as the man in black steals away into the fog. The man in black passes a blind man who shouts out, "This way, here, over here." The man continues down an alley, opens a gate, and shuts it behind him with his blood-stained hands. He goes into a laboratory through another door. He stashes that box with whatever he carved out of that woman. He washes his hands and goes to his study to write in his journal.
He's going to write his life story on paper for posterity. This is the testament of Dr. Henry Jekyll, age 30, male, male, male. He must repeat. He must record this before it's too late. It all began last November when he was visited by his dearest friend, Professor Robertson. And now it's flashback time.
We see as Professor Robertson is arriving, and he sees the arrival of Susan Spencer. He bumps into her, and she drops a couple of books that she's holding. He picks them up and offers to carry them for her, but she tells him not to bother. She's only going to that house right there. But by a happy coincidence, so is he. They walk about 2 steps when they're greeted by Susan's brother, Howard Spencer. Susan tells Howard that this man was helping her with her stuff, and Howard tells him thank you, but we can manage from here. Professor Robertson tips his hat adieu and goes along. Susan throws all of her luggage at Howard and says, "What? You said we could manage."
Inside Dr. Jekyll's apartment, Professor Robertson says that he's working too hard. He said he walked by his place and saw his light burning after midnight last night. Dr. Jekyll asks what Professor Robertson was doing out so late last night. Professor Robertson says he was doing research on a blonde chorus girl. Jekyll says that he's liable to catch the pox that way, but good news, Dr. Jekyll has just the thing for that. Or he will. He's working on an antivirus capable of curing up to 20 diseases at once.
As he's telling Robertson about this, Robertson is only half listening because he's been distracted by Susan Spencer again, who he sees outside the laboratory window. Jekyll continues he's working on an antivirus for diphtheria, and he believes it would only take a year or two to complete the experiment. Robertson confesses that he was distracted by Jekyll's new neighbor, but assures Jekyll that he had his ear the entire time. And what's next? Cholera, then typhoid, then influenza, then yellow fever? Jekyll will be dead and buried before the experiment can be completed.
Dr. Jekyll voiceovers that this chance remark started off this whole affair, a remark that remained and festered in his mind. All he wanted to do for humanity, for life, would be cheated by death, unless he cheated death. And so he decided that he would create an elixir of life. And he dedicated himself to this new pursuit, working day and night, heedless of the outside world.
Now we're at the Spencers. This is upstairs from Dr. Jekyll's flat. Mrs. Spencer, who we are seeing for the first time in the film, is seated, and Howard is standing. Susan is looking out the window. Howard asks what she's been staring at the past few days, and Susan says she's been trying to catch a glimpse of Dr. Jekyll. She hasn't seen him leave ever. Howard looks out the window and says, well, there he goes now, and where can he be going at this ungodly hour?
And the answer to that question is the morgue, where Byker, the creepy attendant, is helping Dr. Jekyll pick out a female body. But he cautions him, don't take this one. I'm rather fond of it. Yuck. So Dr. Jekyll finds another one that he likes and brandishes his scalpel.
Byker tells Jekyll just to call out when he's through. He looks around at all the dead bodies amongst him and then looks at Jekyll again and says, I'll know it's you.
And we're back on the street. A vendor is selling hot potatoes, but for some reason doesn't offer sour cream or bacon bits. But I guess this isn't a Wendy's.
Jekyll comes around the corner and returns to his laboratory. He immediately begins his experiments using the feminine bits he's collected.
We don't know what it is.
He's interrupted by a wine delivery.
1870s Instacart.
When he goes on to retrieve it, Susan Spencer is in the hallway. She finally gets that glimpse of Jekyll's face.
He and his bloody hands retrieve the basket of wine. Susan's ascending the stairs. Seeing Henry, she smiles and he looks guiltily at his blood-stained paw, then pulls the basket in his apartment without acknowledging her at all.
Now back upstairs, the Spencers are all reunited, and Howard is teasing his sister, who has said that Dr. Jekyll was handsome.
But he looks so tired.
Mrs. Spencer tells Howard to knock it off.
Now we're down in Dr. Jekyll's laboratory, where he's doing something with a fly. He doses it with a potion, then he finally sits in his chair to go to sleep. We see the fly fluttering its wings under a glass dome.
Now Professor Robertson is paying another visit to Jekyll. He knocks on the door. Jekyll had been asleep in that chair, but he's awakened by the knocking. Before answering, though, he has to check his fly. Then he answers the door. Robertson tells him he's been trying to see him since Wednesday. Jekyll asks what day it is. It's Saturday. He's been asleep for 3 days.
Lucky.
Robertson tells him that's probably because he'd been working for 10 days straight.
He goes on to show Robertson that fly. Normally this species would live for only a few hours, but this fly has been alive since Wednesday, 3 days. In human terms, that's like extending the lifespan to 200 years. Robertson asks what the heck he's working on, and Jekyll confesses it's an elixir of life. Robertson laughs. That old thing?
Jekyll explains that he used female hormones to stop the aging process.
They make our skin so supple and our hair not fall out.
Robertson is intrigued and wonders if the experiment would work on a male insect. Jekyll says he used a male. But then Robertson points out the eggs the fly had laid.
Jekyll is stunned, even after he sees for himself. So Jekyll returns to the morgue, but now there's no more bodies to be had.
Nope, Byker has run out of corpses.
Well, at least female ones. Byker says, well, there's another way. He recommends Burke and Hare. They're in the trade, so to speak. Famous grave robbers and murderers in history, if you don't know.
Jekyll reminds Byker that his bodies should be female, no more than 20 years old, and Byker won't forget because that's the way he likes them.
Ugh, what a pervert. So the aforementioned Burke and Hare deliver a fresh body to Jekyll's lab. He pays them in brandy at first. Jekyll removes what he wants and tells Burke and Hare to take the corpse right away. Then he pays them in coin as he demands more bodies. Burke looks at Hare, who nods. Burke agrees to supply Jekyll what he needs.
Burke tells him others will cost more, and Jekyll assures them they'll be paid. Next we see Burke and Hare in the tavern, drinking away the money they made in that last transaction. Burke suggests that the body is still in pretty good condition, and they can resell it to another customer. Hare reminds Burke that he had told Jekyll that they could get more bodies.
Just then, a pretty barmaid comes up to take their order. Burke says that he'd like to have her. She calls him cheeky until she sees how much coin he has. Then she asks, what would a girl have to do to get a bit of that? Burke says, nothing not in our nature. Then he orders 2 glasses of porter till they can settle that other transaction. Oh no.
The barmaid tells them to buy whatever they want as long as they could pay for it. Now we're back in Jekyll's lab. Burke and Hare are delivering another body, and Jekyll recognizes the woman. She works in the tavern, he says. Worked, corrects Burke.
I guess it was in her nature to die?
Jekyll starts to ask about the marks on her neck, but Burke, pulling out a knife, says that she's been dead for a short time, and should Jekyll want to inquire further, Burke can cut off his source of supply.
Jekyll caves, all in the cause of science, or, as Hare says, sometimes you've got to do bad to do good. Then Dr. Jekyll returns home, and wouldn't you know it, Susan's there. What a surprise.
She's standing at the top of the stairwell. She introduces herself and says she lives in the apartments above his. He apologizes if he's been too loud, says he's been working a lot lately. Susan says he misunderstands her. She wanted to invite him for dinner. He says he's busy, perhaps another time. And Susan goes to whine to her mother about her rejection.
Howard wonders if Jekyll is impervious to women. Downstairs, we're at the point in Eddie Mad Scientist movie where the doctor experiments on himself. He actually got there pretty fast. He's wearing a snazzy bathrobe that looks a lot like an overcoat, and he downs a vial of green fluid. Soon, he starts to lose motor control.
Back upstairs, the Spencers hear the sound of glass breaking from the laboratory downstairs. Susan wonders if they shouldn't go downstairs to check on the doctor. And Howard asks her if one rebuff isn't enough for her.
That's pretty funny.
Back downstairs, Jekyll chokes and falls into a chair.
He looks like he's trying to cough up a hairball.
He puts his head in his hands, and when he looks up and into the mirror, the face reflected is not his own.
It's a woman. He staggers around his apartment, making even more noise. Upstairs, the Spencers hear another crash. This time, Susan is adamant. Something's wrong, and even Mama thinks Howard ought to check on Jekyll. Downstairs, Jekyll is admiring her reflection and her boobs in the mirror.
She lets down her hair and ignores the sound of Howard knocking at the door.
Howard walks in and gets an eyeful of Dr. Jekyll's chest.
He gawks for a moment, apologizes, and goes upstairs to report that Dr. Jekyll is busy tonight, and Howard apologizes for saying Jekyll was impervious to women.
Susan looks terribly deflated at this news. Now, Jekyll is really, really into her new self. Her cackling can be heard in the upstairs rooms, causing Susan further distress. Downstairs, Dr. Jekyll starts playing with her boob again, but then she's distressed. She has man hands. Ugh.
She runs into the lab and collapses into a chair. Day breaks, and Jekyll, once again a man, wakes from the chair. He goes to the front door to retrieve the morning paper, and surprise, surprise, Susan Spencer is hanging out in the hall.
I swear she lives there.
She says rather coldly that she is sorry that he couldn't make it to dinner last night, and that she didn't realize he had a prior engagement. She says her brother tells her that she's very pretty as she starts storming upstairs.
Jekyll is amazed that her brother saw the woman. Jekyll lies and says that was his sister. Susan's face is as bright as the sun. Sister? She asks for a name. Jekyll pulls one off the front page of the paper he's holding. Hyde is in Hyde Park. Mrs. Hyde. Susan says that she looks forward to meeting her. Hyde stammers she's a widow and then goes back into his apartment without saying another word. But Susan beams at his door nonetheless.
Susan flits up the stairs, delighted that she's still in play for Dr. Jekyll's affections. Susan tells Howard the good news. That was Jekyll's sister, and she's a widow. And that is good news to Howard as well. He muses that it's amazing that Jekyll could have a sister like that.
And you can also kind of see the dollar signs in his eyes. Like maybe they don't have a lot of money, and marrying a rich widow might help him not live with his mother and sister anymore.
Now we're in the tavern. Jekyll and Robertson are meeting there. Jekyll tells Robertson that the fly he had been working with was male. But, as Robertson saw, Jekyll had given the male fly female characteristics.
Robertson cautions Jekyll not to mess with things beyond his understanding. But Jekyll doesn't even hear him. He's convinced he must go on.
Jekyll asks the barmaid if there had been any messages left for him. There hasn't. Turns out Jekyll was supposed to meet a couple of fellows here, but they didn't show up. He excuses himself and once again goes to the morgue.
At the morgue, Jekyll wants Byker to take him to Burke and Hare. Reluctantly, Byker agrees. They walk the short distance to Mrs. Murphy's lodging home, where Burke and Hare live.
The scene is chaotic. People are shouting and breaking windows.
They bump into a lady of the evening. Byker says they don't want her, they want Mrs. Murphy. Where's she? Floating down the river, I expect, is the answer. The whore exposits that she was killed for housing the infamous grave robbers and body snatchers Burke and Hare. Byker asks, well, where's Burke? And she points up to where Burke's feet are dangling. He got hung on something. Streetlight? A lamppost? A Burke by name and a Burke by nature, Byker quips grimly.
Byker thinks they should go, but Jekyll still wants to see Hare. The woman tells Jekyll that he can see Hare, but she doubts Hare will be able to see him, not after he gets out of the lime pit. And sure enough, we see Hare being tossed into the lime pit. He crawls toward the camera, so we get a good look at his now sightless eyes.
We're back at Jekyll's apartment. He's pacing in his study, worrying when he's going to get his next body. Just then, Susan bursts in unannounced with a tray of food. She says it's nothing to do with her, but she heard him pacing, and she knows he hasn't eaten. He acquiesces to this intrusion and offers her some wine. He says she must think him very strange, but she tells him the picture of him in her head. He's noble, dedicated to a good cause, far too dedicated. And she's delighted to make him eat. She's going to force it down his gullet, whether he wants it or not.
Jekyll pours some wine for both of them and invites her to sit down and watch him eat. She says she wishes she could make him slow down and not work so hard. Jekyll says he must continue until he's made a decision.
And when Susan asks what the decision is that he's pondering, he says it's a question of morality, a great evil versus a greater good.
Then he gives her an analogy of a steamship that has to sacrifice itself to save a lifeboat, or to sacrifice the lifeboat to save itself. Susan says if it's the only choice, then the lifeboat can't be saved.
Jekyll accepts this as Susan's blessing. He can now start murdering people. The next question, though, is who? So he goes into town. He passes the songstress, who's always singing, and we see the exposition prostitute, who told us about Burke and Hare, and another whore. But he turns down an alley where another whore is being roughed up by some sailors. She cheated them or something. But they leave her as she cowers against the wall.
Jekyll helps her up, and she's delighted to be helped by a real gentleman. Real gentlemen like her, because she speaks a little French, if you know what I mean.
Yes, this is Betsy.
As they go off, a now blind Hare walks down the street.
She takes him back to her room, where she disrobes. She's prattling on about her parentage as she takes off her clothes. Jekyll watches her in total silence, caressing a knife. She doesn't see the knife in his hands as she asks him to undo her corset. He cuts it off her, and then as she turns around, he stabs her.
Twice. She dies and closes her eyes, in that order. Then Jekyll gets to work on gathering the estrogen sacs, or whatever it is that he's getting from these women's corpses.
Estrogen sacs. I thought ovaries, but it doesn't look like an ovary. It looks like a bit of liver or something. It doesn't make sense. As Jekyll rushes home, he collides with the sightless Hare. Not a rabbit, but Hare from Burke and Hare. He knocks Hare's cane to the cobblestones. Jekyll recognizes the man despite his mirrored sunglasses and hands him back his cane, now covered in bright red blood. And now, the news.
A town crier is reporting the news of the latest murder. Hear this. Murder. A horrible, grisly murder within these precincts. From their upstairs room, the Spencers hear the commotion. Howard is looking out the window and says there's some excitement going on down there. Mrs. Spencer tells them to close the window. Such matters don't concern them.
But Hare does hear it. He's blind, not deaf. In the dead prostitute's room, Professor Robertson and the police are examining the body. Why is he there? We don't know, but I guess that's his job now. They note the body has been expertly carved up, and the cop wonders who but a madman would do such a thing. Robert seems to have an idea who might have done it.
Back at Jekyll's, he has just finished drinking a beaker full of his stuff when there's a knock on the door. He sees that he left the door unlatched, and before he can do anything about it, Susan comes in. She's brought him another plate of food. Jekyll thanks her and says he'll eat it later and tells her she mustn't stay. She asks if he's ill, and he says he's fine and pushes her out the door, latching it with his now feminine hand.
In the street, Howard gives a coin to Hare as he grinds his organ. In Jekyll's apartment, he is now Hyde, but she hasn't got a thing to wear. She nakedly walks into another room and pulls some red satin curtains off the wall and fashions it into a full-length halter dress. She hears Howard enter their building and opens her door to greet him.
Howard is delighted to see Mrs. Hyde and awkwardly reintroduces himself, since the opportunity didn't really present itself the last time they met, and he says that he hopes he will see her again. She says she hopes they shall, and then goes back to her room and smiles.
She's marveling at her power over this pathetic specimen of man. Upstairs, Howard raves about Jekyll's sister. Susan's excited that she's around and asks her mama if she can go and meet her. Susan's mama wryly says that she can hardly barge in without an invitation, though that never stopped her before. But she reminds her she's got to collect that tray. So Susan goes down to bang on the door, but Hyde is no more, and Jekyll's not answering. He rushes to his laboratory and then out the door. Susan walks away, disappointed once again by a member of the fickle Jekyll family.
We then catch up with Jekyll, who is continuing his murder spree. A woman screams as she's killed. He tears her dress with his knife, and then he gathers whatever bits he's using for his experiments.
Bits and bobs.
A man walks by, but doesn't notice. After Jekyll leaves, a bobby discovers the body. He blows his whistle.
We see that Hare hears this too. In the morgue, Professor Robertson, he is with his PhD in corpses, I guess, is examining the latest dead woman. She's been murdered, all right, by the same devilish hand as before. He's with Sergeant Danvers. He's still unsure why any man would do that. Robertson asks Byker if there's anything familiar about the body. Byker claims he's seen too many bodies to see any kind of pattern in these deaths. Then Robertson asks about Dr. Jekyll. Sold any bodies to him lately? After a long pause, Byker says, not lately, no. Robertson says, there's no point selling this one to Jekyll. What he wants has already been taken.
A poster is being put up in town, wanted in connection with the Whitechapel murders. A tall man wearing a tall hat and a dark cloak. Jekyll walks by and stops to read it, but he hasn't seen anyone matching that description.
Jekyll goes home to burn his cloak, presumably his hat as well. And there's a knock on the door. Guess who it is? Can you guess, Jeff?
Well, he only ever has 2 visitors, and 90% of the time it's Susan. So I'm going to say Susan.
Bingo, you're right. Susan is bedecked in Barbie pink, and she asks if she's disturbing him and then barges in before he can answer. But Jekyll is happy to see her. He wants to apologize for his behavior last night. She's carrying a large package, which he takes.
And he invites her to have a seat. She asks what's burning, and Jekyll explains it's just some old clothes that had been stained with chemicals. Susan says that she hopes he plans on replacing them. Jekyll tells her that he's already ordered some. Susan says that must be them then, referring to the box in Jekyll's hands. Jekyll opens it and gets really, really angry when he sees the contents. It's a red dress. Susan laughs and says it's not even his color. She looks at the bill of sale and says it wasn't a mistake. It's charged to Mrs. Hyde.
Now it's nighttime. We're outside. The songstress is warbling down the streets,
singing the only song she knows.
Robertson and Sergeant Danvers are having a brandy as they stake out Jekyll's place. They see Jekyll's silhouette in the window. Robertson tells the cops that he better not get hammered. He wants a reliable witness to what he's not going to say. From his back entrance, Jekyll tries to leave, wearing new togs and a less tall hat now, but there's a policeman just outside his door. He realizes that everyone will be looking for a man, and he goes back inside.
Sergeant Danvers and Robertson are continuing their stakeout. Danvers says he saw a woman go past the window. Robertson questions this. This is Dr. Jekyll, after all. But the sergeant insists he saw what he saw when he saw it. Then Robertson sees her too.
Robertson says that Jekyll must have taken his advice for once, and Sergeant Danvers thinks that the stakeout now just became pointless. Inside, Hyde, wearing the most unsubtle red dress, puts a knife in her boot as she prepares to go out.
Heading out the front door, she's nearly stopped by stalking Susan. But she ignores Susan's call of, Mrs. Hyde. From outside, Professor Robertson and Danvers see that someone is leaving, only it's not Jekyll, this is a woman. Danvers reminds Robertson they're supposed to be watching for Jekyll, but that's getting more and more difficult to do since their flask is now empty. We see Hyde walking through a foggy alleyway towards the tavern.
At the pub, Yvonne, the trollop, is telling one of the prostitutes to mind herself as she totters home. She's extremely soused. As the drunk one leaves, the two of them spot a dark-cloaked figure in the shadows. But when the figure steps into the light, they're relieved to see that it's a lady. But that's no lady, that's Hyde.
Feeling safe, the woman whose name is Julie, heads over to where Hyde is waiting. Hyde asks if she might walk with her, and Julie is happy to have the company.
The drunk woman says to Hyde, "You don't think he'd kill us in twos, do you?"
They start off down the alley when Hyde puts her knife through Julie's throat.
Although it looks like Hyde and the woman were facing each other, as she struck, we see the blade of the knife protruding from the woman's throat. Blood spills onto her ample bosom.
Hyde quickly takes the parts she needs from the dead woman and leaves. The body is quickly discovered, and whistles are blown. Hyde, passing by Hare, stops by to give him a couple of coins. "Do I know you?" he asks. "No, I don't think so," says Hyde, and she smiles and walks off. A bobby runs to tell Sergeant Danvers, who is still staking out Jekyll's place, that there's been another murder. As the sergeant's carriage rides off, we see Hyde returning home.
At the scene of the crime, Danvers asks Robertson if he has anything to say. Robertson says nothing that he hasn't said already, but calls this a queer business indeed. Now we're outside a shop. As Howard bumps into Jekyll, as Jekyll exits the shop laden with parcels.
Howard inquires about Jekyll's sister, and Jekyll responds, "Fine, thank you, I'm in excellent health." Howard says he's misunderstood, and Jekyll softly says, "Howard," and reaches for Howard's face. Then Jekyll gathers himself and leaves. Howard notices that this exchange has taken place in front of the corset shop.
And he raises an eyebrow. At home, Jekyll opens his bundles. There are more red frocks and fripperies. He's upset, and he opens the door to go out. But Robertson is there, cane at the ready. It's somebody different for a change.
Robert says he was just passing by. He sees the dress that Jekyll left sitting out and tells Jekyll that there's no need to explain. Robertson had been telling him for years to find a good woman, and one day he'll look at himself in the mirror and find himself a changed man. Jekyll says he's been too busy working. "Ah, yes," says Robertson, "the elusive elixir of life. And how's that been going?" Jekyll says fine, and Robertson supposes it has been.
Jekyll shoos Robertson out, and Robertson agrees to leave him with his lady in red. But he just one more things him at the door. Has Jekyll heard about all those murders? Jekyll tries to play dumb, but decides to be more convincing. Yes, he's heard a little. Terrible, terrible. Robertson leaves. Jekyll presses his face against the magic mirror and laments that Hyde is now becoming dominant within him.
He's caught in a trap, but to continue his research, he needs Hyde to do the dirty work, but she's getting stronger every time she appears.
Jekyll is now Hyde, and Hyde is now strolling down the streets enveloped by the London fog. She finds a target and follows her. At Robertson's place, he's got a visitor. It's another Bobby announcing yet another murder. Robertson tells the cop he'll be with Danvers soon. But there's something he must do first.
Robertson again raps on Jekyll's door, but this time Hyde answers it. She tells him she's Jekyll's sister. Robertson says that Jekyll never mentioned he had a sister, but her brother is the one he had come to see. Hyde says he's out, and she hasn't seen him since she arrived. Robertson says he has some grave suspicions about Jekyll, and Hyde says she's had concerns about him as well, but they can't talk here. So Robertson suggests they could go back to his place, but she would be unchaperoned. But that sounds like an adventure to Hyde, who, to date, has had a relatively sheltered life.
At the scene of the current horrible grisly murder, everyone is waiting for Robertson. He's always on time, so the police are concerned that he hasn't arrived yet. Now we're at Robertson's place, where Hyde is giving Robertson come-hither eyes. But Robertson really does want to talk about her brother, Jekyll. Robertson mentions the murders and the similarity between the victims, and how that with the knowledge of what his brother's work entails, it leads him to conclude ... But all this time, Hyde has been taking off her outer garments. Robertson turns around and loses his train of thought entirely.
"We can talk later," she says, and Robertson agrees and walks over to her and kisses her. As he's doing this, Hyde reaches to the desk behind her and picks up a letter opener / dagger laying on the desk and pushes it into Robertson's back.
Like he's made of butter. Robertson rears back and sees Jekyll's face as his assailant. And then it's Hyde's again. And now there's a series of quick cuts.
We see Jekyll asleep on his floor, with visions of past murders in his mind. He wakes, relieved it was only a nightmare. Then he sees the bloody letter opener / dagger on the floor beside him. In a fit of anger, he shouts he wants to be rid of you and throws the dagger into the mirror. Then he goes to the lab and pushes over all of his flasks and beakers and Erlenmeyer flasks. Then he goes to his library and throws books on the floor.
However, the transformation is happening again. He, now she, as Hyde, takes the blade out of the mirror. Hyde declares that she exists, not Jekyll, and she will be rid of him. Rid of him! She tears at his shirt. A little while later, Howard returns home. Hyde goes out into the hallway and stops him in his tracks. She lures him into the apartment and the door closes. Then it's nighttime, and the two of them are sloppily making out on her couch.
Howard says if only she knew what a man feels when... But she does know what a man feels when... ...
You know.
Susan comes home and hears her brother drooling through the door.
They're giggling.
She knocks and says, Howard, so Howard has to get up and answer the door. He introduces her to Mrs. Hyde, with whom he was just talking.
Yeah, she's sitting in a red bathrobe that doesn't cover her legs. Susan's taken aback, but then puts on a happy face and says she's been longing to meet Mrs. Hyde. She, Susan, knows her brother, Jekyll, quite well. Hyde says that Jekyll's fond of her too. He says that, gushes Susan, and Hyde says there are no secrets between her and her brother Jekyll. It's so confusing. There's two brothers and two sisters. Hyde says she is very fond of Susan's brother, Howard. An interesting situation. It will be interesting to see who wins, she says. Wins? Wonders Susan.
Hyde says she has a stronger personality. She has had since the moment she was born. And Jekyll is far too weak. Not like Howard. She reaches for his face, but now she has man hands again. She turns and tells them they must go. After they leave, she stares at her distorted reflection in the broken mirror as she changes back to Jekyll. They say, we'll see who wins.
They?
Yeah, both of them.
Oh, yeah. That is the transformation moment that we've been promised in the movie, right?
It's one of them.
It's not what I thought it was going to be.
Well, I think the first one, when he's looking in the mirror, is probably the most impressive.
It looks like a single shot, but they change actors within
I think it is a
shot.
single shot. I don't think that's really a mirror because the reflection doesn't quite match up with the movements of the person making it.
That's true. I thought that too, but then I wasn't sure because I've never found an explanation on how any of this was done. The next morning, the nut grinder is passing. He's grinding nuts for anyone who wants them. Jekyll's waiting for Susan this time, believe it or not. He brings her into his room and warns her to stay away from his sister, Hyde. Hyde means to do her harm. Susan agrees to do that since it means so much to him. In return, she wants a favor. She'd like him to escort her to a concert tonight. She has tickets and Howard doesn't want to go, and neither does Mama. It's too late for her. Jekyll enthusiastically agrees. Susan tells Jekyll to call for her at 8 p.m. and runs upstairs to get ready.
At 7:45, Susan comes in to show off her new prom dress. Her mother says it's very pretty, but Susan wants to look especially attractive tonight. And does her mother think he'll like it? If he sees it, says Howard, who just came in from outside. He's complaining about the fog.
Thick as pea soup. Howard says Jekyll's really unpredictable, so he probably won't show up. Susan doesn't want to hear this, so she protests.
And her mother once again tells Howard to knock it off.
Howard insincerely takes it all back. Downstairs, Jekyll is indeed getting ready to go. But then he spots that red dress. Uh-oh. Upstairs, it's about 8:05, maybe a little later, and Susan's ready to go out wearing her cloak and gloves. But Jekyll hasn't called yet.
Howard suggests perhaps Jekyll got lost in the stairway. There is a thick fog, he reminds her.
Or maybe the clock's just running fast.
Susan decides he's on his way, and she'll meet him halfway. She goes down and knocks on Jekyll's door. He latches the lock, still holding the red dress. Howard comes out to check on her, and Susan tells him that Jekyll is outside hailing a cab, and she says goodnight and goes outside.
What a dummy. Susan's alone, walking through the foggy night. Now Hyde has returned. She's wearing that red dress. She vows that there will be a different kind of victim this time, not a streetwalker, a fresh young virgin, and the tug-of-war will be over between us once and for all. Hyde goes outside and stalks Susan through the streets. Fortunately for her, Susan has decided this would be a great time to be alone on a deserted, foggy street with a murderer prowling about.
For some time, Hyde stalks Susan.
Her footsteps are so loud she can't help but be...
And Hyde's roughly dress makes a lot of noise. When Susan stops, Hyde comes up behind her and raises the knife. But Hyde has man hands once again, and they won't let her finish the job.
Susan goes off unmolested. Back at Jekyll's, we're now returning to the beginning scene in the movie, where Jekyll is writing in his journal. Jekyll writes that it's just a matter of time till Sister Hyde completely takes over. Jekyll's only hope is to pinpoint the flaw in his experiments. It might be that he's just changing back and forth into a woman and not really trying to make an elixir of life, but what do I know? I'm no scientist. He's won the battle, but the war isn't over. He must do one final experiment. And for this, he needs Byker.
But Byker can't or won't help him, telling Jekyll that he's got nothing suitable for him at the moment, and he shows Jekyll the door. Jekyll realizes he must kill again, only he dare not invoke Hyde, so he's going to have to do it himself. He stalks a woman and kills her. It's the woman from the beginning of the movie, and the whole scene is shown to us again, but with a lot less detail. We cut back to Jekyll continuing his journal entry, and now we're done with the flashback, and we can actually move on with the story.
In the pub, Hare is telling the assembled crowd how the doctor he used to work for used to carve women up the same way the Whitechapel victims are carved up. Danvers overhears this and comes in. Yvonne asks for the doctor's name, but Hare says he'll need a drink first before he's going to tell that. Danvers grabs him and says, "Tell me now." Jekyll is finishing his journal entry. It's done now. Finished.
Upstairs, Susan, still in her prom dress, is sitting with her mother. The crowd chattering outside is growing louder, so Mrs. Spencer asks Susan to close the window. But they can still hear the arrival of the police at Jekyll's door. Jekyll finishes his confession and jumps up to leave, but spills something on it. And as the police start to break down the door, Jekyll runs out the back. He goes to the gate, but another policeman is coming down the alley. Jekyll closes and locks the gate, and turning around, sees the police have now entered his flat. So Jekyll runs to a nearby ladder and climbs. The police see him, and Sergeant Danvers sends an officer up after him.
Danvers goes out into the hallway outside Jekyll's apartment, where Susan is waiting. She asks what Jekyll has done. Danvers says he's the Whitechapel murderer. Susan is stunned by her terrible taste in men.
Jekyll is now sliding along the edge of the building as a crowd gathers below, Howard and Susan now amongst them.
He tries to jump off a ledge to the building next door. He barely makes it. He's holding onto the eaves as he passes across the slender ledge. He walks in front of an unlit window, which suddenly lights up. It's a stained glass window that's illuminated from within. There are blue panels and red panels, and the red panels look a lot like a red dress to us.
The blue panel looks like a blue dress.
But we don't care about blue in this movie, we just care about red.
As Jekyll looks through the stained glass window at the oncoming policeman, Jekyll's hands once again turn feminine. Through the glass, we see Jekyll transform back into Hyde.
His weak woman arms can't support him as he clings onto those eaves any longer. He falls and hits with a sickening thud to everyone's shock and horror. They turn the body over. It's half Hyde, half hideous mask meant to be Jekyll. In Jekyll's lab, his confession is slowly being destroyed by acid. And that's the end.
You are listening to the American International Podcast, where we're discussing Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971.
Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde was made by British studio Hammer Films, which had adapted the Jekyll and Hyde story twice before, in The Ugly Duckling in 1959 and The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll in 1960.
The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll was released in America by American International Pictures as House of Fright and Jekyll's Inferno. A February 1971 edition of the TV Scout Reports column reported that 20th Century Fox is searching for a series property for Charles Nelson Riley and Ruth Buzzy. They had one, Riley said, in which I would have played a vet with Ruth as my assistant. It was called Dr. Jekyll and Miss Hyde. Then they discovered someone making a film in England called Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, and there went our title.
I wonder if they ever found anything. Scriptwriter Brian Clemens said in a 1971 interview published in the Evening Herald, "We promised for the first time a sex change on screen," adding that the transition from man to woman would be more terrifying than the previous man-to-man transitions of John Barrymore, Spencer Tracy, or Frederick March. Don't know if I agree with that.
In an item published in the AIP press book for Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, Ralph Bates said he wanted to be a doctor, coming from a family where both his parents were doctors, and his grandfather, also a physician, was Louis Pasteur's nephew. Unfortunately, he said, at college I was the sort of fellow who added up 2 and 2 and got 5. I just couldn't pass the math exams to become a medical student. He then turned his attention to acting, winning a scholarship in the drama department at Yale University.
The producers of Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde were conducting an exhaustive search for an actress who resembled Ralph Bates enough to play the role. Martine Beswick found out about this when she was visiting her agent, and someone there who knew about the search told her to call Hammer Films immediately, as she would be perfect for the part.
Martine Beswick has said in various interviews that she agreed to do a topless scene when she took the role, but during filming, director Roy Ward Baker said she should do a full frontal nude shot. Beswick objected, and she and the director argued over it so much they did not speak to each other for a week. They finally came to an agreement. Beswick would take everything off, but they could only show her breasts and buttocks on screen, not her full front. In order to do that, she would still have to strip totally naked on set. She demanded a closed set, which the director agreed to, but she remembers seeing, quote, dozens of people hanging from the rafters, unquote, in the studio during the shoot to look at her, and that the director put a camera directly in front of her, making her object all over again. She said this earned her a reputation of being difficult to work with for a while.
Later, Beswick said that she thought Hammer only included nudity because they felt they had to in order to keep up with the current trend of including nudity in mainstream films. She thought it diminished Hammer's campiness and elegant style. She said, quote, in fact, I fought with them about that because they kept saying, we've got to have full frontal nudity. And I said, no, you do not. That's not going to be good for the film. And I think they took the wrong path. And I think that was the breaking point.
Caroline Munro is said to have turned down the lead female role in this and 2 other Hammer films, being Frankenstein and Monster from Hell in 1974 and Vampirella, which was never made by Hammer, because she refused to perform nude.
I swear this note is in every movie we do. She's always everyone's first choice, but she won't get naked. Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde was released on October 17, 1971 in Great Britain, and in April of 1972 in the United States. In many places, it was released on a double bill with Blood from the Mummy's Tomb.
The film was originally rated X in the UK, and the British Board of Film Classification requested cuts to remove an intercutting of a murder and a rabbit gutting, and to edit a bedroom murder and the stabbing of Professor Robertson. The bedroom murder was shortened, though Hammer re-edited the stabbing of the professor to comprise flash shots of earlier killings. Despite initial PBFC objections, the film was then passed, and all later releases of it featured the same edited print.
The AIP Pressbook recommended that theater owners capitalize on the his and hers themes in Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde by doing one of the following. Having the most popular bar owner, that's their words, concoct a Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde cocktail that could only be served to couples, and calling it the sexiest drink in town. They should also serve it on a doily with the movie's name and playtimes printed on it.
Another suggestion was to make a display of faux daggers with the tips and edges painted blood red, and the words his on one dagger and hers on the other.
They also suggested offering free passes to the movie to all brother and sister twins, provided they have the documentation to prove themselves as such, of course. And they recommend this stunt get coverage by the local press, naturally.
Taglines for Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde include, the sexual transformation of a man into a woman will actually take place before your very eyes.
This film is filled with shock after shock after shock.
Victim after victim dies horribly in throat-cutting orgy. Unnatural laboratory experiments performed behind barred doors. Once again, he will change sexes and kill, kill, kill.
Parents, be sure your children are sufficiently mature to witness the intimate details of this frank and revealing film.
The Monthly Film Bulletin wrote about the film, quote, the idea of adapting Jekyll and Hyde for the age of the polymorphous perverse could easily have misfired in the wrong hands. But for the most part, director Roy Ward Baker manages the whole thing superbly. The plot is a kind of potpourri of Victorian archetypes, containing not just the Jekyll mythos, but Jack the Ripper as well as Burke and Hare, and although there are plenty of covert jokes on psycho lines, he hasn't been feeling himself lately, the overall tone remains refreshingly straight, and the transformation sequences are stunning, with Bates appearing momentarily emasculated before being transformed into his seductive alter ego, Martine Beswick. Unquote.
Variety called the film highly imaginative. Further writing, director Roy Ward Baker has set a good pace, built tension nicely, and played it straight so that it all seems credible. He tops chills and gruesome murders with quite a lot of subtle fun. Bates and Beswick's strong, attractive personalities bear strange resemblance to each other, making the transitions entirely believable.
Ann Gorino in the Daily News gave the film 2.5 stars and said, it's Robert Louis Stevenson's turn to pop up from the grave and scream at what British filmmakers have done to his classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, adding, it comes out just another mediocre Jack or Jackie the Ripper science fiction drama. The only striking thing about all this nonsense is the remarkable resemblance between Ralph Bates and Martine Beswick, who played the title roles.
Phil Strasberg wrote in the Arizona Republic, Hammer Films and American International have combined to present some of the more diverting, digestible horror flicks of recent vintage, and evolved a Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde interpretation laden with their typically strong production values for cinemas of this genre, adding, the transformations are aptly done, the killings aren't overly violent, the Jekyll-Hyde pair are excellently acted by Ralph Bates and Martine Beswick, and the story follows a logical line.
Lou Cedrone wrote in the Baltimore Evening Sun that There is nothing clinical in the transmogrification. Actor Ralph Bates simply turns into actress Martine Beswick, adding, "I'd say the doctor is a misogynistic transvestite, and don't think the film isn't funny because it is, especially when Jekyll fondles a lovely red number, wondering if he/she is going to wear it to his/her next kill." The drones of the film ask the spectator to overlook any number of craters in the script. It is amusing in a campy sort of way.
And Kevin Thomas of the LA Times also enjoyed Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, saying that though the film's premise was preposterous, the movie worked because Roy Ward Baker, a gifted horror specialist, directs Brian Clemens' clever script with such authority that he easily achieves a willing suspension of disbelief. Therefore, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde is able to work on several levels. As a traditional cautionary tale about the dangers of tampering with nature, a classic, as a struggle of good versus evil, and above all, as a metaphor for the tragedy of confused sexual identity.
A film using the same theme of a male scientist who turns into a woman was released in 1995 called Dr. Jekyll and Ms. Hyde, starring Tim Daly and Sean Young. It received a Razzie Award for Worst Remake Ripoff.
Well, congratulations to them.
So, Cheryl, barring the noticeable differences between this and the original story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, how close do you think this comes to the story?
Well, this version weaves together a couple other historical figures and makes them part of the Jekyll and Hyde mythos. The Whitechapel murders was a Jack the Ripper thing, and Burke and Hare had their own separate murder game going on. So tying them all together, I guess, for British viewers would be exciting to see all that history put into one package, although it's not accurate to the story at all.
Do you know if it's accurate to the same time period?
It's about the same time period, yeah. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was published in 1886. The Whitechapel murders started in 1888, but the Burke and Hare murders were committed in the 1820s. So obviously that is not historically accurate. But the practice of selling bodies to medical colleges, although not legally sanctioned, went on for far longer than it should have, even though steps were taken after Burke and Hare's murder spree to prevent that.
In a lot of adaptations, at least since this time, the character of Hyde is associated with the Whitechapel murders. And while that obviously wasn't part of the original book, it's kind of become part of the lore. I don't know if Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde was the first to do this, but it has been done in several films since. We also saw a couple of familiar faces in this film. Gerald Sim, who played Professor Robertson, and Louis Fiander, who played Howard Spencer, both appeared in another film that we just recently watched, and it would come out later the same year, which also dealt with finding an elixir of life.
Once they got to the set of Dr. Fives Rises Again, they must have felt right at home. They've basically done this material before. The actor who played Howard Spencer was the man killed by the corkscrew machine in Dr. Fives.
And Gerald Sim, who played Professor Robertson here, played Hackett, the man who ran up the sand dunes to find the Clockwork Quartet waiting for him and then got his face sandblasted in a Jeep.
Right. He had a beard in that movie, and I didn't recognize him, but I did recognize Louis Fiander right away. I thought the acting in this movie was really good. I really enjoyed Ralph Bates and Martine Beswick, as all the reviewers did too. Their resemblance was so similar. Martine Beswick especially is just a powerful presence when she's in front of the camera, when she's dominant.
Yeah, she's pretty badass. In the commentary from the old Anchor Bay release that was carried over into the recently on a print Blu-ray from Scream Factory, she mentions that she and Ralph Bates didn't really look alike, but working together, they kind of started to resemble each other, just as like a married couple starts to resemble each other over time.
Or like people who grow to resemble their dogs.
Yeah, same thing.
Right.
Because they never shared screen time, really, but they were really close in that they had to be standing right behind each other to perform the hands of the actor on screen.
Right, or swap costumes with each other. I imagine this, except for her having to do the unwanted nude scene, I imagine this was a lot of fun to do this movie. It certainly seemed like the actors were enjoying themselves. I really love the Victorian setting. You can tell that the street scenes are all studio set facades put up, but they did a lot to add to the atmosphere. They have the town crier, they have the nut grinder, the hot potato salesman, the strange woman walking around singing for no particular reason, crowd scenes when they need them, people vanishing into nowhere when they don't, fog everywhere. It felt very apt for the period.
Well, yeah, I agree. The sets and production design are amazing in this film. There are some wide shots where you can tell that it's done on a stage.
I didn't expect them to find some old Victorian tenement relic that they could film in. So that makes sense that they're in a studio.
But a lot of these shots are so claustrophobic with the fog and the way that they're shot with everything closing in.
But they're supposed to be. You need to feel that claustrophobia.
It really helps the film.
Yeah.
And in terms of the set design, if you look around the main sets of Jekyll's study and even Robertson's house, which we only see for a second, and the Spencers, there's so much junk lying around. They really filled it with a lot of detail.
Oh, yeah. It looks like a real apartment setting. Maybe it is. I don't know. But the laboratory is really stocked full of flasks and beakers and vials and all sorts of potions and whatnot and Bunsen burners or whatever they have in a lab. And it's very spacious. It's a big, wide room that's got the laboratory tables that really went all out on the production design, and it helps the film enormously. I did think there were two flawed characters in this movie. Not complaining. It made the movie more interesting. The first one is Susan Spencer. My goodness, what an annoying little child she was.
Stalker Susan.
She is always there.
I mean, I get where she's coming from. It's the Victorian era. The actress was 25, so we could assume Susan is near that age. So she's near spinsterhood. And there's a dashing young doctor just downstairs.
Right. And the clock's ticking. You either marry or you have to live on the kindness of others or become a nanny or nursemaid or teacher or some underpaid profession. So she's got to land a husband, and what better than the doctor downstairs? But just the way she forces herself on him at the worst possible moments sometimes, it's hilarious, honestly. And not in a bad way. It's really funny.
Yeah, I think Susan was my favorite character in this movie just because every time she arrived, oh, there she goes again.
And her facial expressions are priceless, which we didn't really convey in the synopsis. But the look on her face when she finds out that Mrs. Hyde is his sister, it's like the sun is rising in her eyes. And oh my goodness, everything can go forward as planned. I'm going to land that man no matter what. And she just inserts himself into his life, unwanted, at least at first, despite the fact that she sees him with bloody hands in the hallway. I guess she didn't notice, but still. Everyone else noticed. We noticed. And the fact that he's really squirrely and he doesn't really seem to be into her at all didn't really stop her.
In terms of her character, they didn't really explain it, but I wonder where she is before the events of the film, because her family appears to already be living in that flat above Jekyll's. They know who he is,
right,
and she doesn't. So she just arrives. So she's 25 years old. Where was she?
Finishing school? I don't know. Boarding school? They don't say. She could have just been coming back for a visit she could have just been coming back from a visit.
But would she be living on her own
She could have been visiting an aunt in the country. Read some Jane Austen. They do that all the time.
Okay, but then wouldn't she know the guy downstairs? Jekyll seems to be pretty established there.
Maybe it was a really long visit, like a year. 2 years, who knows? Sometimes they would send unmarried female relatives off to help older relatives when they needed assistance with something. Maybe she was looking after some small children. Maybe she was looking after an elderly relative. We can't really know because they didn't give her much of a backstory. She was just the love-struck girl upstairs. Sort of a plot device.
Well, I needed a backstory to that plot device.
Obviously, she's not in the book.
I don't remember any of the supporting characters in the book. I read it when I was like 9.
Right. I have a very dim memory of it myself. The other character that I thought was extremely flawed is our main character, Dr. Henry Jekyll, or at least half of the main character, only because his experiments make no sense to me. He wants to extend life. He did extend life with that fly. He just happened to also imbue it with female characteristics. But in his further pursuits, which involve taking the egg sacs from fertile young women or whatever he's taking, none of that furthers the extension of life. All that does is change him to a woman and back to a man again.
Well, we don't know because the movie doesn't last long enough, and he doesn't live long enough to see if he would have lived longer.
But he stops experimenting the moment that fly is just... The only thing he ever experiments on, aside from creating the elixir of sex change that he drinks himself, is that fly experiment. Nothing beyond that. ever goes towards the extension of life. Everything else just involves him resorting to murder to keep doing the sex change back and forth.
Well, that's the result, but
what's the goal?
You could argue that the goal is still the elixir of life, but he's just kind of got involved with the process of it more than the pursuit.
But science should have a reason for conducting an experiment.
You're right. Doing the same thing over and over again, other than creating a control to log in your experimentation, doesn't really...
It doesn't further
it doesn't
pursuit
further
of
the
knowledge.
research.
And the fact that he only experiments on one person, himself, means that there's no telling what giving this elixir to a woman would do. He's only experimenting on one man. What about someone who is older than him?
There is a line where he realizes that he must have missed something in his calculations that's causing him to turn into a woman instead of just staying young. And he wants to pursue that and to realize that he has to continue killing.
But every experiment, regardless of whether it furthers his life or not, all this takes place over the course of a few days. So that there's no telling that he should wait like 5 years and see if he continues to age normally then. He should try doing this to lab rats before he involves killing other people. His supposed question of morality is disingenuous. He's not really pursuing anything beyond his own vanity, I think, trying to make himself the center of all this research.
Well, it's not really his fault because Professor Robertson was the one who suggested he do it in the first place. And then
Susan
it was
gave him
Susan
permission
who
to kill
decided
people.
that he should start killing.
That's true. He did outsource all of those issues. But no, try it on old people first. Maybe they wouldn't mind. See if they become more youthful or live longer than they would have.
As I recall in the original novel, what happens is he drinks the potion. He's searching for, it's kind of an elixir of life. He wants to find out what causes the body to grow old and die, and he wants to prevent that. And then when he does drink the potion, he turns into Hyde, who is kind of brutish, but is also described as being a few years younger than Jekyll and smaller because he's younger.
But there's nothing like that in Jekyll's estimation of Hyde here because he didn't even really have any data, aside from the killings, what Hyde was like. He knew that Howard thought she was very fetching, but he didn't know anything else about her except her fashion choices and her access to his credit line. This doesn't diminish my enjoyment of the film in any way, just so you know. It's just a nitpick I have about this movie that came up in the second viewing.
Well, the nitpick I had was Professor Robertson. Why does he get to examine all the dead bodies? Is he the only one in town who can do this?
Yeah, in the small burg of London, England. Yeah, that doesn't make sense either. They should already have a police coroner on staff.
It makes sense that he'd be the one to deduce that this is Jekyll doing the killings, not that it does him any good.
No, but it gives them a reason to put him where he's put, but it doesn't make sense within the context of the plot. No. He needs to have access to this information, but he's not the person who should be examining the bodies. Because they had that one scene in the alley where he didn't show up, and the police are just waiting for him like they can't do anything without him. And that's ridiculous. There should have already had somebody on staff who took care of all the murders that happened prior to his arrival in town. They never say what he's a professor of. I think I joked that he has a PhD in dead bodies. But he's a very fun character. Most of these characters are a lot of fun, I think. The streetwalkers are very exaggerated in their outward sluttiness, and it's almost charming. They're dressed in these silly old hats, and yet they're streetwalkers.
And they all have the Cockney accent, which helps accentuate their character.
Exactly. The first kill, Ralph Bates actually had to murder his own wife on screen. They weren't married yet. That's how they met.
Well, that was the first kill chronologically, but not the first kill in the film.
Not the first kill we see, but chronologically speaking, when he kills Betsy, the prostitute who speaks French, that is his wife that he met on set, and later they were married. So good for them.
Now, this is one of just a handful of Hammer films that AIP distributed in America. And I think the second we've covered on the podcast, the first being The Vampire Lovers, also directed by Roy Ward Baker.
Yeah, he had a lot more boobs in that movie than he had access to here.
And I just have to say that the AIP poster for Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, it kind of sucks.
What don't you like about it? The fact that they're nude and
it's not even them. It's different. It's just a man and a woman.
Like we haven't seen that before. AIP always puts people who aren't in the movies on their poster.
And then the main image is like it
looks like Peter Cushing.
It's like a bloody man. Yeah. And it's done monochrome.
I thought maybe it was supposed to be Robertson. But
yeah, it must be, because that's really the only man who was killed, but It doesn't look like him.
No, like I said, I think it looks like Peter Cushing.
Well, AIP would just use whatever stock images they had on hand to make some of these posters. If you look at the poster for Horror House in 1969, there's a woman holding her hands up and screaming. And that image is from the beginning of Trunk to Cairo when the bomb goes off and the woman runs out from the ocean and screams. Well, and it's on both posters. The same image is on the Trunk to Cairo poster and the Horror House poster.
Well, why waste a good image? Like anyone's going to know that but the two of us. Well, the Beast with a Million Eyes, just for one example, had a lot of imagery. In fact, there was nothing from the movie on the poster. So this is SOP for AIP.
Well, I think the poster was a rush job, seeing that the film was released in Britain in 1971 and an early release in 72 for AIP.
They had 6
months.
And
I don't think AIP was originally slated to release this one. I think it might have been Columbia.
Oh, wow.
I think I read or heard that somewhere. So don't hold me to it, but I believe that's the case.
Well, it's possible that it was a last minute pickup for them, thus necessitating a rush job. However, if that's the case, they had all the film imagery. They could have actually picked something from the movie. So that's not really an excuse.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've seen the British poster for this or not.
I checked the British Film Institute's entry on this movie, and they just had some basic information. They didn't have any artwork or anything.
So, Cheryl, I don't think we had a lot of negative things to say about Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. And given that, how would you equate that to a rating using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic?
I really enjoyed this movie. I know I made a big deal about nitpicking the content of Dr. Jekyll's experimentation. It did seem like they didn't think that all the way through. However, this movie is so enjoyable. It's stylish. It's good looking. The acting is really good. The story is compelling. The murders aren't too grisly. It was enough to keep me interested in what happens next and raise the stakes high enough that I really was invested in it. I thought Martine Beswick was extremely good in this movie. I really loved her as Sister Hyde. She may be pure evil, but she's a very strong, powerful female evil, and I always like to see that. There's really nothing to complain about acting-wise. I rarely think that about movies that we watch for the American International podcast. The costumes were gorgeous. I loved that the red dress was Hyde's motif throughout the movie. And just seeing one was enough to trigger the transformation when Jekyll was in charge. And the fact that we didn't notice it the first time, I don't think, but at the end, when that window lights up and it's the stained glass and there's something that looks like a red dress and it's so subtle, they don't really call much attention to it. But that little detail that we noticed the second time around, at least I did, was just so cool that they thought of that and they didn't belabor it. They just let their viewers figure it out. They trusted them. And it was really neat. I just thought this movie was so neat. I give it an A. I liked it a lot. I thought it was going to be more sleazy, more exploitative, but it was just a good story told very well. What did you think?
Well, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde has always been one of my favorite stories. When I was around 8 years old, I actually started writing an adaptation myself, done with kids because that's what I was, called Junior Jekyll. It was never finished because I was 8, but I worked on it for a long time.
You might have just put an idea in somebody's head, so they need to credit you when they write the kid version of Jekyll and Hyde.
But one thing that struck me about this movie is that it really has a different feel from a lot of the other Hammer horror that I've seen. And I think this is just because of the time period it takes place. It's not the Gothic stuff that we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the modern times, obviously, that we've seen. And there really isn't a whole lot of stories that take place in this short Victorian era. They previously had done The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, which I know you and I watched fairly recently, but I don't really remember it, and I look forward to revisiting that one day for the podcast.
Yeah. Although the Jack the Ripper story has been covered countless times before and after this movie.
Right. And as I said, I don't know if this was the first time that the Jack the Ripper was equated with the Jekyll and Hyde story, but it's a really good fit. And I kind of like the way they shoehorn Burke and Hare as an extra bonus in here, too.
They're fun characters, too, at least until they die or get maimed. There's just a sort of a jolly air to this movie.
And the production, they take the time to do little things. In the script, there's the lines lifted from Psycho, he's not himself, that kind of thing. Those little bits were always amusing.
References to yourself in the mirror, the man you are.
I haven't seen him since I arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all these instances where Jekyll is walking in the shadows and half of his face is lit and half of it is in shadow, showing the split personality he has.
The duality of his nature.
And it's little things like that, but it's really cool to look and see how they incorporated them. And I think this was an idea that almost started off as a joke. At least people took it as a joke when Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde was first pitched. The story is it was in the Hammer commissary, and the writer Brian Clemens just suggested it. And the room erupted with laughter. But once the laughter calmed down, the head of Hammer said, "Hey, come down to my office on Wednesday." And when Brian arrived, he found that the poster had already been mocked up and he had to go and write this movie.
Well, imagine it in the hands of Charles Nelson Riley and Ruth Buzzy. That would have been very silly indeed.
They were using the title, but were they using that story?
I don't know. I mean, he was a veterinarian, so probably not. But I'm just saying the concept of a male-female Jekyll-Hyde pair could have been very silly. It could have been pure camp.
I don't think I've ever seen the Tim Daly and Sean Young, Dr. Jekyll and Ms. Hyde, but I believe that was at least partial comedy.
I would hope.
So I'm going to agree that this is a pretty good film, and I too am going to give it an A.
Wow, that hasn't happened in a while. We both like the movie that much.
It happened last week.
Oh, that's true. That almost never happens, Jeff. We both give A's. You give A's very infrequently, so I know it means something from you, whereas I just follow my heart. If you'd like to follow your heart and tell us how you feel about Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde or any of the American International pictures, you can contact us via our website, AIPpod.com. That's AIPPOD.com. You can find all the episodes of the podcast to date. We have a lot more media that you can't see when you listen to our podcast. We have lobby cards, posters, trailers, and more. And there's a way to get in touch with us and tell us what you think, what movies you'd like to see, what opinions we had that weren't correct. There is no need to tell us that you have 100,000 Instagram followers for us, but contact us with anything else. We'd love to hear from our listeners.
Well, I think we better go lock the front door before the upstairs neighbor comes down with a tray. This has been the American International Podcast, and until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.